Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rencontre économique d'Aix. My name is Pierre Paskowski. I am editor-in-chief of Brut Media, and we are delighted to partner the meeting this year for the very first time. So I'd like to thank the entire team for having invited us to become a partner. We're here to have a debate, and the title is World Demographics, the Shock of Civilizations, referring possibly to a rather controversial book written by Samuel Huntington, which was published in '96, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that later on. I am here in the presence of Hippolyte Dalby, who is the coordinator of this session. He's a member of the Cercle des Economistes. He's an economist himself, and he's a specialist in demographics. We have alongside him Yamina Aya, who's a visiting senior fellow at Brown University in India, and she's also been involved in the Center for Policy Research. Next to her, Olivier Laureau, president of the Servier Group. Olivier, you joined the group in 1982, I believe, so you've been with the company for over 40 years now. Alongside Mr. Laureau, we have Sybille Lemaire, who's executive director of the Bayard Group and founder of the Landois Club, or the Club Landois, as they say in French, which is all studying demographics, which ties in nicely with our subject. And we've also got Christian Schmidt de la Brélie, who's Director General of Clesia. So, Christian, I think your entire career has been in insurance, AXA, Bayer, AGRR, and you're here today with us for this session. So I'm immediately going to hand the floor or the microphone to Hippolyte, because he is going to sketch out the challenges of this session before we then start addressing each speaker individually. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for introducing me, Pierre. Before I come up on stage, you showed me a short clip which Brut has just made about economists, and the very first question which is broached is, are economists more intelligent than everyone else? The answer to that is no. So I'm going to try and show that we are intelligent all the same, and I'm going to talk about demographics. For 20 years now, I've been studying demographics, and one thing which strikes me is that connection between what's going on in demographic research and the way in which that information is perceived in the public debate. In the public debate, very often you've got a rather dramatic view of demographic movement. We're talking about explosion in the world population, explosion of migration. We often hear words and terms which are rather frightening. The amazing thing is that we use the same approach for the opposite action. So if you've got negative growth, if you've got a decrease in population, it's very frightening. If you remember Montesquieu, he wrote a whole book about the declining population back in the day, and that was very scary for everybody. And when you've got a region that is losing its population, when people are leaving, it's the opposite of inward migration. It's also perceived as something which is quite awful. The amazing thing is that the fear that we are now experiencing, well, we keep hold of that fear from year to year. In 1960, the world population amounted to 3 billion people, so it sounds like a small group of people really now. It's tiny if you compare it with the figure now, 3 billion human beings. You have to take a look back at the press back in that day, just to try and remember what was done with that figure there. It was perceived as being an explosion in terms of demographics, and the main researchers and very important people, those whose voices were heard back in the day about demographics, were saying, we are heading towards a brick wall. And they were saying back in the day that by the year 2000, the world population will double, and we will never have enough intelligence or capacity to deal with that growth in population. It was described as a population bomb. We knew that poverty would increase and food insecurity would increase as well. So what I'm trying to get at here is not to say that we shouldn't be frightened, but to try and understand why demographic movements can be frightening. Well, the first point to raise is to say that this is something which we have no control over. We cannot steer that. It's not a budget, it's not a public policy. It's really difficult, in fact, to determine how the population will evolve, particularly on a worldwide scale. There's only one country in the world that has drastically reduced its population, and that was China, because it adopted very forceful policies. But today, China is encouraging its population to increase, and it's having a hard time doing that. So we do not have any control over that. We cannot steer it. It's the same for immigration as well. We've got some parties here in Europe who have been elected because they promised to reduce immigration. But the facts are quite clear. The figures have not been brought down in those particular countries. So you cannot control it. Second point, very specific to the population, and that is that it's very difficult to determine what we really want. Speaking as an economist, it's hard to define what the optimum population might be. So what for employment, you know, for economic growth, you know what you're aiming for, but for the population, it's much more difficult. What would be the right number of children for each couple? People don't really know. They say at best, well, the right number is the number of children that I particularly want to have, but that isn't very informative as an answer. And so we are converging gradually towards a way of saying that a couple should have 2 children, and preferably a boy and a girl. What does that reveal? That reveals that people think they are, when they think they're at optimum, then it's stability. 2 children for a couple, it means that the world population will not be increasing. So we're looking for stability. And so that, in my eyes, is the biggest reason for this dramatic attitude, i.e. the population is changing a lot, whereas intrinsically we don't want it to change at all. So let's take a look at what really is going on today. Today we've got the North, rich countries, everyone's aging there. Aging in a very accelerated manner. It's quite amazing. And then on the other hand, you've got growth of the world population mainly happening in those poorest countries where the average revenue is the lowest. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, we are imagining in 2050 an increase of 1 billion people in the population. So aging in the north, demographic growth in the south, and the youth is also in the south. I don't know if we really realize that in 2050, 1 in 3 youngsters will be born in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's the demographic reality we're faced with today. And we tend to over-dramatize things. We say, given this situation, there are going to be amazing flows of migrants from the south up to the north. Let's not get over-dramatic about these things. Let's take a look at the facts and let's see how our societies can adapt. How can the North rise to this rather costly question of an aging population? And how can the South create jobs for all of the youngsters that live there and do it in a way that respects the environment? So I think I may have overstepped my time slot, but thank you very much. Well, Hippolyte, thank you very much. So I'm going to hand the floor to Yamini Aya. So Yamini, you are from India and you are at the head of Center for Policy Research, and I would like to know your point of view on, and the point of view of emerging countries on these great demographic trends that we're witnessing. And I'd like to know how we can put in place dignified migration for these countries.
Thank you. It's an absolute privilege for me to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me a chance to engage with such a wide variety of issues and wide variety of people. I come from the world's most populous country. I come from a country that has the world's largest young people. Our median age today is about 28. In 2030, it will be 30. And it's really fascinating for me to be here in France which is now, along with many other parts of Europe, an aging population. The contrast in the nature of the challenge, to me, is really stark. And yet I see in conversations we are having in India and conversations I'm witness to here in Europe, that there is actually two sides to the same coin, and the two can complement each other very effectively. India's biggest challenge is that this young demographic is in desperate search of work. We are simply not able to generate the kind of employment that is needed for this demographic dividend that we ought to be converting into a great opportunity. We aren't able to do this for reasons of our own and the dynamic of our economic trajectory. But in more ways than one, there are parts of India whose economies have benefited hugely from mobility of workers. One of India's, in fact, ironically, least populous state, its total fertility rate is lower than the average, national average, with the highest human capital, has built out its economy in the last 25 years on the back of remittances and movement of people between the southern state of Kerala and the Gulf countries. This has in many ways benefited the economy of Kerala, but it has also benefited in no small measure the economies of Gulf countries, where workers across both low-skilled and semi-skilled and high-skilled workers have been moving in a continuous pattern. Labor mobility can in fact generate a very important synergy that benefits economies which are at different parts of their development. In Europe, we have a challenge of aging. OECD suggests that Europe is going to need about 400 million workers in semi-skilled and medium-skilled forms of employment, particularly in the arena of old age care. India, on the other hand, has been one of the most successful exporters of services, movement of people, because we have a high demographic dividend. We have also been able to generate a large number of educated youth that are in search of jobs both within India and outside, and provide high quality services. And the care industry is a really good example of where nursing export of nursing skills and medical skills has been a very big part of India's service exports, along with technology. There are ways in which this can work very effectively together, because Europe needs these workers, the West needs these workers. The global South, with its high population, by one estimate it would be about 1.4 billion workers, of whom only about 60% will find work in their home countries, are also looking to explore the world. The question and challenge that we have to confront is this: how can we manage this mass movement of people that will benefit all economies globally in a way that ensures dignity of workers? Coming from the global South, coming from India, the big question on our minds is, how do we ensure that our workers can move in ways that are legal, in ways that are secure, in ways that recognize their cultural context? And I know a similar debate is going on here in Europe as well. How do we ensure integration of different communities in ways that are both multicultural at one level, but also preserving the dignity of workers? There is a way to build this, but first we have to acknowledge that this is a reality. People will move, our economies need it, and there is a way to build synergies both in the global South and in the global North to ensure that we can do this in a dignified way. Thank you.
Merci Yamina. Vous avez dit...
Thank you very much. Yamina, you said at the very beginning that in France you get the feeling that it's a country with an aging population. So Olivier Laureau, I'd like to move on to you and say you are at the head of the Servier Group. So what are the challenges for world health given the aging of the population, and what role can innovation play in the pharmaceutical industry? Thank you very much for inviting me to the round table. I am going to try and describe the vision industry has. We're an industry which is present all around the world, and we're highly committed to innovation. The last World War was a war against a virus, and it was experienced all over the world. And the different countries experienced it differently. There were differences from one continent to the other. Access to patients, or the patients didn't have the same access to the best kind of treatment and monitoring. So what are the basics? What can we learn from that crisis? Well, healthcare solutions are a common good. A common good. So this is something which is of strategic importance. So this is not something which is just for one country alone. It's for all countries and all patients all around the world. The second thing which we learned, or the second basic thing which we learned, was that seeking a new solution for future pandemics, because there will be pandemics in the future, seeking therapeutic solutions for chronic illnesses has to involve innovation, and that is a long-term project. It's hard to grasp that sometimes. It's hard for patients to accept it, that it takes a long time to discover solutions. There's a second criterion in innovation, and that is that it's risky. That means that a lot of labs are researching, but only few arrive to actually innovate. We saw that with COVID. The second basic which we can take away from that COVID crisis is access. Access to a solution once it's been found. How can we address this question of access? How can we organize access throughout Europe or around the globe? So if you take stock of these three fundamentals, you've got three challenges. The first challenge, and I'm coming back to that one because it's so important in our business, the first challenge is one of innovation, the innovation environment. The second challenge that we have is industrialization. And the third challenge we have to face is availability. So let me come back to the first challenge. So today, which continents are making the best progress in terms of innovation? States, China. Europe is lagging behind in the innovation race, particularly when we're talking about healthcare and therapeutic solutions. That means we need to create special environments where we have researchers that work in different disciplines. It also means that we have to become used to taking risks. We have not to be risk averse. Mustn't be averse to risks. So we've got money, which will be needed to set to one side for future pandemics, reserved for therapies, which will be needed for the illnesses of tomorrow. We need to be investing that money now to deal with those future illnesses. So let's imagine that public-private partnerships could be better developed. We see this in the States. It's really easy there to set up a public-private partnership. It's much harder in France, sadly, to construct that kind of partnership, whereas there are so many benefits to be had. And then we've got this challenge. The second one is industrialization. That means we have to anticipate. To have a factory that can produce a vaccine takes time. It takes 4 years, 5 years, but a pandemic will arrive more quickly than that. So you have to anticipate. Europe has started to anticipate. Just take a look at how the states have broached this subject. They were really fleet of foot. We also have to address the question of access. What are the priorities going to be, depending on existing demographics? So how can we guarantee that all of the investments, all of the capital that has been dedicated to these development programs, industrial programs, gives advantages back, so that we can invest in the long term? So I'd be very happy to answer that kind of question. Thank you very much. So we've talked about the aging working population. Sibylle Lemaire, may I ask you what role businesses play in terms of employing the elderly? Hello, everybody. My main message here is very simple, and it's at the core of the development of 26 public-private enterprises who are here in France. We can no longer sweep demographics under the carpet. Businesses are a powerful lever for changing people's mindset. I'm going to broach 3 points. The consequences of demographics are, we haven't drawn all the consequences yet. Secondly, businesses would have an advantage to study the question, and 3, what have we learned from it? Firstly, we haven't drawn all the conclusions from demographics, and I'm always amazed by that, and I share Hippolyte's point of view on that one. In fact, all of the planets are aligned to broach this subject serenely for 3 reasons. First of all, we can be objective about it. Demographics is a precise science. This subject involves absolutely everybody. Let's remember what Groucho Marx said. In every old person, there's a young person who's wondering what on earth what happened. This subject should allow everybody's points of view and interests to come together, but sadly that is not the case. Particularly here in France, where more than any other country, we are refusing to address the subject straight on. This question of life's being longer, the question of aging, and that means that we have a senior employability rate which is 10% below the rest of Europe. Second thing, we are noting that the situation is evolving slowly because businesses are noting that the retirement age is going to be pushed back, so they have to broach the subject, and it's important to them for human resources and from business point of view. Let's talk about human resources to begin with and how you employ senior citizens. There's a barrage in terms of the employees and the businesses. The salaried employees aren't happy about this because they're hearing that they don't want to work for more years, whereas the company has to keep them on for longer, and they need qualified employees. And there's a problem in terms of the firms as well, because the businesses have been told that they have to learn how to recruit seniors. So it's a bit of a terrible situation here in France. If you look at it from a business point of view, progress, as Anna Arendt said, it's talked about progress, and the longer lasting lives are changing things, and the employees have to answer the new needs of the employees. We have single parents, we have mental health, the well-being of employees, and we have to work towards their improvement so that the companies perform better. This pyramid of ages is not being taken into account, and that has an impact on how work is organized and in absenteeism and productivity. Third point, if you've got a group of businesses where you listen to Adolphe Landry and Louise Duras, they were talking about a theory which addresses 3 things. Firstly, we have a commitment charter for your employees if they're over 50. It's an open source document. Anybody can read it. All businesses can read this document if you want to join us. 136 businesses have signed it, and most of the CAC businesses have signed it for their international subsidiaries. We launched an index. It's on a voluntary basis here in France for employing those who are over 50, and we are working on a human capital index because it is a key factor of competitivity in the long term. So to conclude, whereas we know that public authorities no longer have any room for manoeuvre in financial terms, then it's down to the businesses and firms to grapple with this subject. We have to shift from a policy of eviction to prevention. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Sybille Lemaire. Yes, of course, it is down to the businesses to tackle this question. Also, it's down to the insurance companies, I think, to tackle this question. So, Mr. Schmidt de la Brélie, you're general manager of Clésia. So how is the insurance world tackling this subject of the aging population? Well, we are part of the Club Londois, and we hope to contribute in a positive way to everything which they're doing there. But let me pick up on what Sybil was just saying on that exact science, which is demographics, as Hippolyte said as well. But we do need to interpret that information. So insurance includes managing pensions, etc. I have the honor of being at the head of a group which works on these obligatory pension contributions which have to be made, and so the state chimes in as well to make sure that the system is very balanced over time, and so that we take responsible decisions and create plus and negative points. Negative points if your forecast is negative, and you can correct things as time goes along. So everyone needs to be very responsible. There are some strike days, of course, and these systems are put up so that things last in the long term. That's the first question. So the responsibility of the different players, nationally speaking. The second subject of this contribution of insurance companies is in the field of healthcare. And there are several things which are done. We are lagging behind in France in terms of prevention. Aging in good health is an issue. Working in good health is an issue as well. And if we don't have a better system, if we don't have better collaboration between players in the private sector, such as the insurance companies and the public players, then we will find ourselves in a sticky situation where we are obliged to change. I can give you an example here. I experienced this with chemists. 2 years before COVID, for 18 months I was fighting with them to make sure that the salaried employees at the chemists could be vaccinated directly, autonomously, without having to go through that complex process which was causing bottlenecks in all the dispensing places. At the end of the day, we had the Ministry of Health who allowed us to have an exceptional test, a trial period. So during COVID 2019, that was the case, and we noted that the anti-flu vaccination is a natural, perhaps a benign risk, and it's not a debate, but it means that we don't want them to be off work during that period. So there's a lot of work which has to be done. We have to coordinate between the healthcare professionals, the insurance companies, the state. We have to work together more in the future. And I've seen some programs concerning truck drivers, or people who work in restaurant, or jobs where people are standing up all day, or people who are driving forklift trucks and things like that. So when you're working on prevention, you can work in better health. And the second subject, as an insurance company and as a business, and here I can see Flor Simonin in the room, so I can talk about the institution which I work with. We see that there is a feeling and a need for all businesses throughout life to take care of the people who work with them, to make sure that the quality of work is fine, what the quality of the working environment is fine. How can we better do this? How can we find solutions? We see when you're helping men and women through the birth process, for example, last year with Thierry Hulot, who's also in this room, we set up a wonderful fund, a prevention fund for well-being and parenthood within the company, and that is something which is very positive. So there are many, many components which can be used so that we can solve in a relevant manner this question of accompanying demographic change.
Everybody knows it in terms of retirement, but also life insurance, value sharing. We are pursuing a logic of capitalization and transmission. I always think about Jean Hervé and Hippolyte's views on housing regarding that scheme, regarding to old age. We have no short-term solutions nowadays for health professionals helping them at home. How could we help them? How can we share value that we have? Should housing be automatically transmitted, or shouldn't it be capital that we should take into consideration? So an insurance company is more an accelerator of transformation and allows throughout the society, with collective agreements, but also individual contracts, to make sure that all the different professionals working on that subject can concert one another and be more relevant in that field. Thank you, Christian. The title of this session struck me, I have to say, The Clash of Civilizations, namely this reference to Simon Huntington and the clash between the North and the South. Is it really a clash of civilizations on that topic of world demographics?
The globe has always moved and benefited enormously from that kind of movement. It was that movement of people that had discovery of new land. It is that movement of people that created all forms of food. It is that movement of people that created a sharing of culture, a sharing of religion. So I don't think it is a clash. However, it is vulnerable to being a clash. It is vulnerable to being a clash because we are in a very uncertain phase in our history. We are in an uncertain phase because countries across the globe are experiencing massive amounts of change and in very different ways. And those massive amounts of change always create anxieties and vulnerabilities, which inevitably become fodder for a polarizing politics. So in fact, I would turn this question around to say, how can we avoid this mobility from becoming a clash? Because people moving is part and parcel of history. People will move. We have to ensure at this moment in history how we can enable that movement to happen in ways that are complementary rather than in ways that contribute to deeper and greater polarization. That means that we have to think through dignity of labor. We have to think through ways of assimilation of cultures, but at the same time find ways of creating spaces where cultures can thrive in their own forms. I think this is the first critical moment in history where, post the formation of nation states and ideas of nationalism having become very core to our sense of identity, we are seeing mass movements of people. And we are seeing these mass movements of people under very different kinds of circumstances. I spoke a lot about movement of people in the context of search for work. But you're also seeing movement of people in the context of crises, movement of people when there is war, movement of people in the context of famine, movement of people in the context of fear of different kinds. How do we create an environment in which that mobility and movement can be welcoming, but at the same time recognizing the complexities of where people are moving and the complexities of who is moving and how we can create that integration. It requires us as citizens of different nation states to also put a check on our politicians who inevitably use anxieties and fears to create new types of politics that we should be wary of. I see this happening in my own country, even within the context of a nation state, so evidently that it's really important for us to have more conversations like this to remind ourselves of the value of mobility and the value of learning from different cultures, different ethnicities, different languages, different ways of the world to assimilate into creating a new world that we shall see going forward.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Yaminia. There's also this matter of North and South and the role and the importance of women in this new direction, in this new shape of demographics. So, Cyril Lemaire, I would like to have your opinion on this because it's very important for you, isn't it? Yes, it's important for me. in the steps of prevention of clashes, because we are really at the center of demographical transitions. They have a more acute risks to become actually old, elderly, poor, and that's not an insurable risk for two reasons. To give you some figures, 30% of women that retire in France perceive less than 890 euros a month. We know why. That's salary inequalities, that's partial time, and that's the drastic circumstances relating to monoparenthood. So these figures should trigger some reflection, especially for women, because they live 6 years longer than men in life expectancy. So they have room for debt. They have more room for debt than the men. What about funding? How can we work on the subject in the insurance world? Early on, Olivier Leroux was talking about collaboration between the public and the private worlds. Is it an important solution in all fields anyway, in insurance and everywhere else? I'll give the floor to Olivier afterwards. There's a lot of common denominators between all of these worlds in matters of public policy. This is a framework that we respect and I approve on a personal basis, because we're lucky. In France, we'll be old before we are poor, and it won't be the case in other countries. Besides all these transformations ahead of us, we know all the answers. We try to make public policy evolve, because they find it difficult to understand in a relevant manner what is going on and how to act upon the population we have. We can't see a generic population, but we have some pathologies related to some specific professions. Age, we can see the physiologic age of the person. We can be older when we exercise some types of professions rather than others. And so that has a cost, because we do not have endless pockets, obviously. So we need to allocate money. And the more we can work together hand in hand as actors and stakeholders of the health professional world, the more we can move forward with relevant solutions. The second subject matter is in the corporate world, where social protection is more and more needed. We need to have discussions with companies to find the best solutions. We were talking about well-being and parenthood. That's also relating to men and women when they start being part of the working population until they get retired, with all the pathologies that they could get throughout their lives. We talk about caregivers. That's also important. There are subsidies, helps, assistance that we can provide financially to be as relevant and accurate as possible, with as little money as we can get, so we can get the best out of our investment. Just something about caregivers, because we need to have figures in mind. That's between 11 and 12 million of caregivers, 17 million in 5 years, and 72% of caregivers are women. Olivier Leroux, I would like to have your opinion when you talk about the articulation between the public world and the private world in the pharmacy sector industry. Well, we should actually look ahead and talk about forecasts, because we're talking about for the next 20 years when we talk about health and public policy. First is pandemics. They will break out. How could we prevent them? How could we curb them? They will come. They will break, because we know that there's an association today between human health, animal health, and the environment. All these factors, altogether, they could lead to epidemics. How can we anticipate them? That is the question. How can we regulate that? How can we have the information from scratch, as opposed to what happened with COVID, for instance? What I'm talking about is not a potential. It is for sure that's the population aging 67, 77. And that will be combined with a movement of population, as you mentioned earlier, which is not only a north-south or south-north movement, but it comes also from Asia towards other countries. And when we talk about south to north movement, I'm talking about Africa to Europe, but also Latin America to North America or other continents. So all these factors must be anticipated. And for chronic diseases, which are mainly cardiovascular diseases and cancer treatments, and the third pathology upcoming is neurological diseases, neurodegenerative diseases. How should we provide assistance? How should we provide treatment? There's a key element to this. That's artificial intelligence to anticipate pandemics, but also to treat chronic diseases that in the future. AI with a quality of data that is robust, that requires data sharing. In the US, it's much easier. We have associations of patients sharing data. In China, it's mandatory to share data. In Europe, and especially in France, we're still lagging behind in terms of data sharing. Anonymized data, obviously. We need to be more agile. We need to be faster to put on the market some new treatment. It is essential to make sure that the patient can follow their treatment. And I'm going to give you a figure which is a source of savings for all our health systems in Europe, and that could be reallocated to research. Today, the cost of lack of compliance of patients, that means that the medicine box is left in the cabinet, that's more than 3 billion euros. That's the World Health Organization figures. And we have a lot of deaths, a lot of people going to ER, a lot of people going to doctors because of their lack of compliance. There's a lot of digital tools, family environment, caregivers. This is part of their priorities. They should follow up on treatment. The treatment supervision is key, and data and artificial intelligence are key in a framework that is extremely competitive, as I might remind you. China, in a few years, has managed to go from 2% of disruptive innovation to 16% of worldwide disruptive innovation. It goes fast, with a lot of protection that would be entailed. The US actually ahead of us when there was a discrepancy of a few billion euros between Europe and the US. Now they're ahead of us by tenfold in a few years. So you can see that in terms of research investment. How can we be competitive in France? How can we catch up on our delay? We need to change regulation. We need to change the law because we're talking about long cycles on regulated, highly regulated cycles, because patients are the beneficiaries of our discoveries. We need to move fast because we're talking about long cycles of research and development for 6-7 years. And especially for pandemics, we have to anticipate and maybe have more risk appetite. I'll give the last word to Hippolyte for the wrap-up of this session. Hippolyte, you have the floor. Thank you, Pierre. I would like to give you some kind of summary and make a connection between economy and demography. Economics can be very complicated sometimes, but the connection with demography is quite straightforward. And right away, it is actually very understandable. in an economy, the more you have people working, the wealthier the state is. You can actually pick any type of country. The more people work in that country, as a proportion, of course, and the more you have wealth. What is the proportion of people working in France? Do you know? I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the age group of those that have the age to work. No, I'm not talking about that. It's actually 40%. That means that 60% of the population does not work. Children, retired people. So 40% of that population works and generates wealth, but supplies also services. And that these are all products and services that we consume. What is going to happen with population aging? And we're actually anticipating that. And we know it. This proportion will decrease. You'll have a greater proportion of people not working, and so the population will get poorer. When we need to fund the consumption of more people, we get poorer, and that's the way it is. So what are the solutions? Well, there's technical progress. We could capitalize upon that. That could allow us to face and overcome the demographic challenges that has been mentioned this morning. But what is important is that, yes, we need innovation, we need technical progress, but innovation will not replace work. We need people working. It is complementary. That's an illusion to think that we are going to be in a society where robots will do all the work and generate wealth, and we're going to be idle. No. So we need technical progress, but we also need working population. We need labor. So it is of assistance, but it's not sufficient. Something else to take in mind, people could work longer, for a longer period of time. Okay, nobody's very, very enthusiastic about it, obviously. That's rather the opposite. It's quite complex to reform the retirement scheme, to talk to the population and say, you're going to work longer because there's a demographic challenge to address. It's rather the opposite reaction we get. So we should go back to population. And there are two components that are important. The first one being, and Sibylle has talked about it implicitly, women. We still have a participation of women working which is lower because of discrimination, among others. And this is urgent. It is really important to make sure that women can actually integrate the labor market with salary equality and promotion equality, because it makes the nation wealthier and it makes them have decent living conditions. So, first element, women. Second component is migration. Migration will make us wealthier. Migrants increase the working population ratio and will supply a large number of services that is useful for the society. We can refuse and have a program whereby there's no migrants and women stay at home. Okay, but then we'll be poorer. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. So going back to these opening values that are conducive, favorable, and inclusive, these are values that make us wealthier. So it's not really a matter of clash of civilizations between the North and the South and the East and the West. It's ourselves as a civilization. We have to understand what we want. We have to refocus on the real values that we want to have. And the aim is prosperity, even though prosperity is not a means to an end. Thank you, Hippolyte. Thank you to all of you. That's the end of this session. And we'll see each other at 11:30. Thank you to all of you.
contente.
We are delighted to have Marlene Solveig with us for this, Dolveig rather, who's CEO of SNCF. We also got Robert Zarada with us, who's Chief Executive Officer with Bonafide consultancy company. We're going to be talking about happiness and how you can measure happiness. For over 20 years now, economists have been trying hard to measure what cannot be seen, to measure well-being, satisfaction, happiness, and to try and quantify it and objectivize it, to objectivize the subjective. The notion being that there are so many things that can be measured, such as revenue, employment, etc. There are many other things, parts of life and work, which are very important, but which can't be counted. So it would be a good idea to try and quantify them and to monitor them, both on an individual basis and also for society and for companies as well. So we now know that subjectivity, feeling, satisfaction, optimism, having projects and emotions, we all know that they're very important in life, in society, and in people's behavior, and in political behavior as well. We've seen the importance of anger and satisfaction in political decisions taken by citizens. And what we're going to be talking about today is the role of these emotions and these feelings at work. So is it important? What is its importance? How is it important? How can you measure it in a company? Because a company is a very important link in society. It's the place where people spend the largest number of hours of their lives. And so after this brief introduction, I'm going to hand the floor over to my speakers who've got very, very many interesting things to tell us. Well, thank you very much, Claudia. I really am delighted to be along on the stage here with Robert and Claudia. Claudia, who is a world-renowned economist of happiness, so it's great to be up here on the stage with, and I'm happy to participate in this round table. But I must say that for the past 3 weeks, I have been saying to myself, it can't be very easy to talk about happiness in this rather unusual period we're going through, where the mood is not very good, where families are falling out about politics. We see that that society is kind of splitting into two fractions. So I was trying to think about what the opposite of happiness is. We were talking about anger earlier on, but it's a hot topic: anger, envy, jealousy, fear, indignation. And today, more than ever, these are hot topics. And so we are going to be talking about measuring happiness. However, I am absolutely convinced that we have to go and identify what it means to feel happiness. And that's not an easy task. You can't really go and take the pulse. You can't really identify that real feeling. How can you measure happiness? There are many indicators. Claudia's been working on many of them. Gross national happiness, for example. We also have happiness indicators at work to identify how happy people are. We've got quantitative measures, we've got happiness at being at work, satisfaction barometers of people working, and we've got some quality indicators as well. When you're out in the field, they're going to listen to what the teams have to say. Relationships with professional organizations. Different bodies who can say what's going on in the field. So you have to go out really and feel what's going on. And so I was saying, as a director, as being at the head of the SNCF, we've got 260,000 employees. We have a huge number of employees and we're responsible for them. And I'm constantly looking for the recipe for happiness. I've seen a few ingredients. So social connection, that's really important. In a company, you have to have social connection, relationships with other people, relations with your colleagues. A lot of economists have worked on this. I was reading about relationships with others that can induce happiness. And so for me, that's absolutely key. And that's what society is all about. Social links, that's the first ingredient. The second is dynamics. I was saying to myself that in the destructive creation of footage, we could identify perhaps something for those who are at the head of companies, because we're constantly innovating when you work for a company. And when you're introducing change, you have to accompany it. Progress is great, but the teams can be anchored in their habits, and you have to work hard on these concepts of accompanying change. And so you don't want to create an upheaval. And above and beyond dynamics, you need to have trust. Trust is so important. Simplification also, because our businesses nowadays are so very complex. When they're complex, they can become complicated. So it means we need to simplify it. And there's meaning. Meaning is so important as well. The SNCF train company, of course, it's a decarbonized transport system, and the people who work at our company have to know that they're doing something which is very useful. I don't know if I've got time to tell you what my 3 convictions are. I've got 3 strong convictions, but I see that the clock is ticking, so I'll mention them later on when the question and answer period begins. Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I'm going to try and be brief also and take 3 minutes. I first of all would like to say that here I am on the stage with, when I'm on stage next to a business leader, I've got a bit of a kind of tic, which I was taught by Hervé Lorenzi some 50 years ago. And I always think it's a good idea to take up 2 very easy ideas, which you'll find in any management handbook. It's between management and economy. Marx talks about 2 things which are really, really important. One is time, and the other is work. Time. When you wonder how economists might measure happiness, when you're talking about measuring something, you need a measuring unit. And time, I think, is probably that measurement unit that will enable us to grasp the subject of how we can measure happiness in an objective way. Because everyone knows what time is. And then work as well, because as Claudia's already mentioned, we spend such a lot of our time at work. So to come back to these key points, I'm going to use, although I was very young at the time, I'm going to use 3 principles from May 1968. The first is, don't waste your life earning your money. And so that's a bit of a complex paradox of how you measure happiness between sharing time and money, because that slogan is dividing your life between time and money. And so this is a tension which we're constantly undergoing, and that's what drives the economists to try and measure happiness, to try and identify this gross national happiness level. The second point is work, and Marx says that what sets humans apart from animals, and work does take up a huge amount of our time. And it's interesting to note how over time the relationship to work has evolved. It's changed. The most recent change, and in 3 minutes I'm going to go right to that third point, is it's kind of a laboratory, this period that we had when we were all in lockdown during COVID. And it really brought about a different way of experiencing work, working remotely. And it's kind of a paradox though, but we became a bit more free. It's not alienated work, but is it free work? The lockdown enabled to bring to the fore a new way of working. And I think I may have a little bit of time left. There are 2 questions which arise out of that, 2 Marxist questions. The first one is, are we not heading towards a new way of dividing work in society? Marx was talking about class, and he saw simple work and complex work. Are we not identifying what is workable and what is not workable? This could be a good question, because in the conception of happiness and constructing happiness, work has a key place. But if we identify the younger generations, and here I'll take another 68 slogan which has been dug out of mothballs again recently in a book, be young and shut your mouth. That was a slogan from 1968. In the same way, and I'm promoting my own work here, the Bonafide Institute has recently carried out a survey on work and youngsters. We see that the meaning of work and the importance of work is being questioned. The second thing, the balance between private and working life as being a component of happiness is key. And the third problem is that of management. For management, I only found one quote, and it might be a bit provoking. Hierarchy is like a set of shelves. The higher up it is, the less useful it is. And so that could be challenged, of course, but the youngsters have this combination of these different points of view, these different tensions, and that leads today to a kind of strange time frame, i.e. how between that part of emotion and that part of logic, how are you going to balance this all out so that next year that we're going to be here again to talk about measuring happiness rather than how we can measure the extra large proportion of unhappiness. Well, thank you very much, Robert, for opening this rather poetic introduction to this subject. So, as far as individuals are concerned, the ultimate question is it's a rare resource. It cannot be produced, and it's time. That's the rare resource. So what do we do with this rare resource, which is our time? That's the question which we have on the table. But do we have to oppose free time and working time in those basic models that we always start with? But we know that we can't rely simply on those. When you're not working, when you have free time, is that the source of happiness? And should you reduce working time as much as possible, as has been suggested? Should you aim for a 4-day working week? Or is that because happiness is outside of work? But when we carry out our surveys, quite surprisingly, we note that in all European countries, at all ages, those people who are employed are happier than those who are retired. So I wonder if it's not more a question of the quality of time when you're at work and when you're not at work. As working from home, for example, is another question. You're more autonomous, you're free to organize your time as you wish. But as far as the company is concerned, there is the risk of destroying those social connections which Marlène was talking about. So at the end of the day, no one's going into the office anymore, you don't see anyone, you've not got those social links anymore. So I just want to talk about time for a moment. How can one produce quality time? Well, quality time is a tricky question. And lifetime is short if you think back to Seneca. And every minute is counted, and everyone has to have some freedom between the different things that it needs to balance out. So I must come back to what Robert was talking about, because this is a controversy we're here talking about today. I think time has to be a four-wheel drive vehicle. If it's disconnected, if the director, the work manager is connected, he can take the pulse, he can understand. Let's not give any political messages here. I really am convinced, this is my vision of the manager, this is what I believe, that a manager, it's really important that he's connected and knows what's going on, or she. And that enables you to understand the life of your colleagues, and this kind of balance kind of thing. If you come back to working from home, well, teleworking is not available to everybody. We've talked about it a lot. There can be some very positive sides for those people who enjoy the new equilibrium that they find. They're spending less time in transport, and they can balance their home-work balance better. But you've got bit problems because when your children come home after school, it can be a bit tricky. But you have to think about that very carefully. The important thing is to say that not all jobs can be done from home, and if you have responsibilities for a team, you need to be there. You need to be with your clients, for example. You need to talk to your clients. If you're working at a station, for example, you have to make sure that it's running smoothly. You've got your security agents there, your cleaning staff there. Those jobs cannot be done remotely. What I don't like is to create these opposite worlds, where in each one there are some possibilities in the way that you do your job, maximizing the creation of the best working conditions possible so that we can all be happy at work. And that really is important, but perhaps I should let Robert come back with his vision. Well, just to continue with what Marlène and Claudia have both been saying, it's not a good interpretation of this piece of writing. Is the right to laziness. I'm not talking about the right to laziness. Work and the meaningful work, when you look at youngsters, well, it's absolutely essential, and it has to be chosen, and it must not be alienating, to use the classic vocabulary. So that's the first point. So I'm not here giving advocacy against work at all. Work no longer is as central to society as it once was. I think a lot of surveys have showed that. I don't want to enter into that category of those who are retired, who are unhappy. I'm not in that category because I work although I am retired. So I have both hats on. So I'm a bit kind of between the two. And my feeling is that even amongst youngsters, and depending on different types of work, I think there is that no one feels that work is central to life anymore. If we come back to working from home and what Marlène was saying, that's very obvious. What I want to talk about is how today we analyze how work is divided out. It used to be simple work, complex work. It used to be the working class and the white-collar workers. But today, it no longer works like that. It's just not suitable anymore. It's not adapted. New ways of apprehending work, and Marlène is quite right about that. There are some things which cannot be done from home, and there are some jobs which can be done from home. And so rather than defending those front lines, to create a rear line of social and economic policies, I think what I want to say is that we have to just take a fresh look at all of this. My final point, when you look about how you broach society. Laurent Berger, 2 years ago, was talking about that shift between purchasing power to living power. And I think we ought to address these similar questions in society, in ecological, social democrat societies. We've tried to look at all of this, and let's take a look at how our different revenues. We should open up a new page in this line of thought, not identifying how revenue is distributed, but how time is distributed. And I think that would require a lot of more articles and books written by professional economists, which I am not, or which I no longer am, particularly when I was talking with the Nobel Prize winner earlier on. And however, I believe that there are some new fields for exploration in economics when we're talking about happiness, because we've got this issue of objects. It's a complex question, what is happiness, and it's a tricky thing to measure, and what unit of measurement are we going to use? Thank you very much. I think we've now got time for questions and answers. If somebody wants to have a bash, off we go.
Travaux qui sont un vrai bonheur et vous...
Yeah, sometimes there are jobs where you're really happy and you don't need to recover, you don't need some time off. But it can be the opposite depending on the job you get. What do you think about that? Indeed, in any management policy, we have to take into account the difficulties relating to jobs. Some are more arduous than others. And this is what we do with SNCF, with professional organizations and trade unions. It's difficult to give the gist of everything because there's arduousness at the end of the career, there's during career, there might be some more time off for those that are disabled. Situations are very different depending on the circumstances. There's a wide array of possibilities. But you're right. It's a matter of balance. So we have to work on all the efforts for.
Là, ça marche? Voilà.
In a book of realistic utopia, I can't think of the title. In 1920, they would forecast 15-hour week of work. That's what they say in this book. But de facto, we work much more. And we would have swapped these hours of work for more consumption. So with this excess of work, how can we act? What should we buy with it, actually? Oh, you're actually talking about something that is very interesting, is to find the right balance between working and time beyond the utopia of realistic utopia. There are actually movements on that subject. In the year 68, Baudrillard's works are interesting. There are also situational works that have been drafted on the subject. But we don't work 15 hours a day. We don't work 15 hours a week. We work 15 hours a day. That's where the problem lies. So we have to be realistic. And recently, there's a lot that has been said on work, remote working, and work time reduction. But what is important is to choose the job you want to have. And there's a difference between the work that you don't choose and the arduousness. We have to manage the circumstances relating to arduousness of work. Unfortunately, the clock is ticking, so I would just give you a few quotes, one that we might not often hear, because the best way to see happiness is from Prévert. Happiness, you acknowledge it once it's over. And a quote for my neighbor, happiness is straightforward and is as easy as a train that is on time. And maybe one takeaway message for me, I think that the works of Jean Tirole on common good are a true source of inspiration to try to find the right economic balance, combining both the interests of the company, the interests of society, and the individual and human interests. Thank you. Before wrapping up, I would like to say that Robert will sign his book, this most recent book, Towards Reconciliation, tomorrow, right, at 10 o'clock, sharp? Yes. There's also a foreword that is out of the political context. It was drafted by François Hollande, and we did the same work 12 years ago. And there are two words that we find, happiness and work. We said we shouldn't do no word on politics. It's forbidden. Okay?